Hi friends, welcome to another See the Light art project. I'm Pat Nepley and I'm going to be with you through all 4 of these lessons as we complete a project in the style of the Dutch artist Vincent van Gogh. So let me tell you what you're going to need for this first lesson, which is actually the supplies you're going to use for every lesson of this project. You'll need a piece of pastel paper that's toned. That means not white, but some light color, tan, light green, or light blue, which is what I'm going to be using. A set of 24 oil pastels, some baby wipes to keep your hands clean, paper towels to clean your pastels, and an artificial sunflower. Just one is fine to use as your primary guide. We're going to be doing a composition of several of them, but you can work off of the composition I have here in the studio. So Vincent van Gogh was probably one of the most famous artists from the 19th century. He was born in a small village in the Netherlands, or what we call Holland, in 1853, and he was a pastor's son. His father worked for the Dutch Reformed Church. In fact, in the Van Gogh family, there were really only 2 professions that the men did: religion or art. You were either an artist or an art dealer, or you went into ministry. So that's all Van Gogh knew. And he really wanted to be a pastor, but all through his life he was drawing. His brother Theo became a very famous art dealer. And after Van Gogh graduated from high school, he went into that business as well, working as an apprentice at an art dealership. Now, he eventually settled, even as a very young man, in London, and he spent some years there. But after a few years working in the art dealership, he decided he was going to switch course and he wanted to pursue ministry. So he went to work as an apprentice for a Methodist minister. And he really wanted to spread the gospel. That was his goal. Now, a few years went by and he decided he wanted to enter the seminary so that he could become the lead pastor. And his family fully supported him, and he attended a seminary, or enrolled in a seminary in the Netherlands, came back from London to go back in the Netherlands. But there was an entrance exam, and so Van Gogh took it several times and failed every time. This was very disappointing to Van Gogh. He didn't understand why God didn't want him in the ministry, why it was blocking his path. Now, of course, we know now that God had intended for Van Gogh to add beauty to the world through his amazing creativity. See, sometimes we have plans and God has a far better and different plan. We just don't always know it. In fact, there's a great verse in the Bible I want to share with you. It's in the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. See, Van Gogh didn't know it, but God had an amazing plan for him. And now all the world knows his name. Okay, so to get started with our project, I want you to have your paper ready and position it vertically. When we think about our subject matter, why are we doing sunflowers? Well, Van Gogh was a very prolific painter. That meant he painted a lot. Do you know that he had almost 900 paintings in just 10 short years that he painted? He didn't start using oil paints until he was 27, and he died, unfortunately, at the young age of 37. Yet 900 paintings, that is incredible. Well, one of the subjects that he returned to again and again was sunflowers. And so that's going to be the subject matter for our project, sunflowers. But we're not going to be using oil paints like Van Gogh did. We're going to be using oil pastels. Oil pastels, let me tell you a little bit about them. Oil pastels are very similar to crayons in that they have pigment with wax, but oil pastels have the additional ingredient of mineral oil. And there's student grade oil pastels, and then there's professional grade. Now, the professional grade oil pastels have way more mineral oil, so they actually glide on the paper like lipstick. So the better quality pastels you have, the smoother it will be to apply. But whatever you have as your 24 set will work just fine for this project. Take a look at this Van Gogh painting, one of his 14 sunflower paintings that I have here in the studio. It currently resides in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's called 12 Sunflowers. And you can see Van Gogh used a lot of golds and yellows. And the reason is because about the same time that Van Gogh was painting, there was a lot of recent discoveries in the whole industry of artist paints. Whereas before they didn't have the variety of yellows and golds, new ones were coming onto the market as more chemists were working with how to get those pigments from the earth and to mix them in the binders they needed to make paint. So Van Gogh had access to a lot more variety of oil paint colors. Now, Van Gogh wasn't worried about accurately depicting sunflowers. He was more interested in depicting a mood, a feeling you would get from looking at the sunflowers. Some of the flowers face us straight on and we can see the large button center. But some of the flowers are off to the side and you can only see part of the sunflower petals and maybe a larger part of the button center. We're going to do that in our composition as well. Some of the sunflowers we'll be looking at face on and some will be from the side. And that just creates a more interesting composition. So the first thing you want to do is find a pastel that is close in color to your background paper so that it's very subtle. So I'll be using a gray because that's probably the closest to my paper color. So if you have tan paper, find the lightest tan, or if you have a very pale green, perhaps gray would work. And we're going to do some basic drawing of the structure of our composition first. But we're not going to do a lot of detail. That's going to happen when we start to use the oil pastel. So here's our composition here that we're using. And you can see I have a very tall sunflower with the darkest button center, and that's our focal point. That's where the eye will go first when we look at our composition. I have a few sunflowers that are tucked underneath and behind. One that you'll see just from the side that's drooping down, and a few that you really only see from the rear, so they are much lighter in value. We have this deep rusty red urn and a few leaves poking out. So that's going to be our basic composition. Now you should have an artificial sunflower with you so that when we get to the point of looking at the shape of petals and the color variation, you can look at it up close. So I'm going to start with my basic pale pastel on my background paper, and the first thing I want to put in is the urn. So this urn is a sizable urn, but I want to make sure that I don't make it too large on my paper or I won't have room for the sunflowers. So I want you to tell yourself, I'm not going to go past my halfway point. Look at your paper and kind of decide what is halfway up. That will be the top of your urn, and then we have all that space above it for the flowers. So the top of my urn, and just very lightly sketch in a sloping neck. So you're going to have just a very slightly curved line in the center for the top of the urn, and then it slopes in towards the neck of the urn, then comes back out again, extends beyond that. And then the sides go straight down. They don't flare at all, they just go straight down. Now I'm not going to go to the bottom of my paper, like so. Just a very slight curved line. That's all you need. The rest of the detail is going to be put in when we start our color. Now, if you make a mistake, don't worry, because as we lay in our layers of oil pastel color, it will get covered. Okay, so I don't want you to panic. If you don't like a line, redraw it with the pastel. The color will cover it. So now we need to place our sunflowers in the urn. And like I said, some will be forward facing and some will be off to the side. So we're going to put in as our basic shape either circles or ellipses. Circles for those that are straight on, ellipses for those that we see at the side. So when I look at this, I know that I have my tallest flower is off to the right, and so I'm going to put in a circle to represent that flower. Behind it I have two others that are, this one's only slightly turned, so it's very close to a circle, an ellipse, and then this one is tucked behind it, like so. Take a look at this paper plate. If you look straight on at this paper plate, you can see that it's a circle. But if I start to bend this or turn this, from your angle, it starts to look like an ellipse. The more I turn it, the narrower the ellipse. And the less I turn it, then it's a wider ellipse. So that's what you're going to be doing when you make your marks to show where the flowers are going to be. So this one here that droops down over the urn is kind of a wider ellipse like that. This one's even bigger. At the very rear, I see these two flowers that are more like a fanned out pizza slice, like that. That's really all that I can see of them. So there's kind of a fanned out pizza slice here and another one tucked in behind there. I don't really see much of that. Now, what about the stems? Well, very simple lines I'm going to draw, very simple lines because most of that's going to happen with the green. So I'm just getting placement right now, very lightly. And I do have this big, beautiful leaf here. Now the leaves of the sunflower are a traditional spade shape with a very sharp point. They're kind of fuzzy. They have a center vein and they have a sawtooth edge. So I'm going to put here this leaf that's drooping over the front of the urn. I see a little bit of a leaf going in the back. And if you like, you can put in leaves that aren't really there. You can fill in with some leaf shapes. And there I have just my basic placement. The last step is to put in the center button. Now, with sunflowers, the center button is quite large. These are large flowers. Lots of flowers have a center button. But the sunflower anatomy, these are actually considered petals as well in that button. They're just very small and very tightly compact. If you get a chance to look up close at a real sunflower, it's amazing geometry that God designed. So let's draw a nice large button in the center of our circles, and these would be ellipses as well if you drew an ellipse like that. And that's about as far as we need to go with our underdrawing. And I can put my gray pastel back. And now we're ready to add in some color. And this is the exciting part. For all the rest of our lessons together on this sunflower project, we're using the same supplies and we're putting in layers and layers of color. And that's how oil pastel works. Thick and rich like oil paint, but you can actually see the layers of color. So what we're going to do today is simply the first layer of color. So it won't look anything like our finished project, but it's important to add in the layers one at a time and very carefully in order to get the effect of working like Vincent van Gogh. Now, how do we work like Vincent van Gogh? What do I mean when I say that? Well, Vincent van Gogh's style actually changed as he went through his years of working, but the style that he's most recognized for is the style he used at the very end of his life. And probably the most famous painting from that period is one called Starry Night. I love this painting. Perhaps you've seen it. It's a very popular poster. So this is Starry Night. And it was painted when Van Gogh had to stay at a hospital. He painted it right through the window of his room. And what you'll notice about this painting is short strokes of heavy paint. He didn't blend, he swirled them all over the canvas. We'll look at Starry Night again later. Thick, short strokes of color. That's the thing to remember. And we're going to start with our center button. So because this is a dark brown button, even though there's lots of other colors in there, we're going to start with a dark brown from your set. And in order to work in the style of Van Gogh, you're going to have to concentrate because your natural tendency is to want to color in like it's a coloring book because they kind of look like crayons. They have that waxy feel like crayons, but we don't want to work that way. We want to think as if it's paint on a paintbrush. So when you press down, you're pressing hard and you're making short strokes of color. So start from the edge of the button and work into the center. And don't blend in, we're going to keep it with those visible strokes. So we're going to do that to every button on our flowers. Start from the edge of the button line, go into the center, like this. Short little strokes. Even this one that's an ellipse on the side here. Now we'll add in more layers of color to the button later, but that's a great place to start. Now, what about the rest of the petals of the flower? Now, this is where you have to pay attention to the petal shape. So find the medium toned yellow in your set, the one that's kind of right in the middle, not really light and not orangey, just the regular medium yellow. And this will be our base layer for our sunflowers. Now, here's where you have to pay attention to the flower anatomy. So take a look at your sunflower, and you'll notice it's not 4 or 6 or 8 petals. There are a lot of petals on a sunflower. In fact, 12, 14, 16. There's even rows and layers of petals. So that's what makes the sunflower so unique. Lots of petals, lots of layers. So what we're going to do is we're not going to worry about counting to make sure we have 12. What we're going to be more interested in is keeping the petals tight and making sure the shape is right, where they're wider at their center point and then come to a rounded point at the end of each petal. So watch me first and then you can try it. I'm going to start with my main focal point flower, the one that's tallest in my composition. And because I want to stay with the technique of Van Gogh, short, small strokes, I'm going to make strokes out. It's going to be past that initial drawing line, that's fine. And I'm coming out to this point like so. And I'm just going to work my way around off of the button. Short, small strokes. Keep going. Now, each sunflower will not be exactly the same, but you can tell that they're all sunflowers. And I'm staying with small strokes. I'm not blending anything in, and I'm just going all the way around. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this one that's tucked under my focal point flower. And it's okay if those petals overlap each other. Totally fine. We're going to create more delineation when we get to the next layers. Small strokes. I know you're going to want to just draw it like you're drawing, but we're trying to do this in a painterly style. You'll need to press hard, and that's okay. That's how we get that thick application of the pastel. So I'm making a petal shape that then comes to a point. Now you see how I crumbled that pastel? That's fine. That's because I'm applying a lot of pressure. All you're going to do when that happens is turn your paper and tap to get that off. You have to be very careful if you go to brush, you don't brush in an area where you don't want pastel. Not a problem. Now, if your pastels are newer like mine, you're going to have to peel the paper, much like you would a crayon. That's fine. Oil pastels continue to work right until they disappear. So just peel a portion of the paper. Don't take the entire paper off. You want to protect your fingers from getting dirty. So just peel a portion of the paper. Now this pastel broke, no problem. I'm going to keep using it. I'm making short, small strokes out to a point. I can squeeze in one more petal there. Great. Now I have another one over here. So I'm using the same technique, same strategy for the ones that are all forward facing. We haven't done an elliptical one yet. These are all where I pretty much see the whole flower. Now it's going to be a little different when you get to the one where you only kind of see some of the petals from the side. Remember, I said it's fine to overlap. Short strokes. That's what makes it look like Van Gogh. Now, what about when you see something from the side? These petals that are on the far side here, I see most of those. So those are the ones that I'm going to do first, because it's very much like what we did here. Short strokes that come petal shape out to the point. Now this is a flower that's right on the edge of my composition. I want to make sure I have that real nice petal shape. Now what about these here? Well, what we want to do for that, because you are trying to show that they are foreshortened where you only see it, you don't see its full length. Okay. From this side, what I really see is very jagged, almost like a crown on this side without seeing the full petal. So by making some short strokes in like a crown like this, you see how that kind of looks like a crown, a king's crown? Then I can start to get longer as I go around. But then I'll just fill that in with short strokes so that we have that technique of Van Gogh rather than seeing a long petal. And for these fan-shaped ones that you see from the rear, I actually see a lot of that individual petal. So using that same pastel, but the petals are more spread apart. Short strokes. And I see a little bit of this one here. So because I see a gap there, I want to suggest that there's another flower from the rear. I'm just putting in some, they almost look like dotted lines, some short strokes. Now that is just layer number 1 of our oil pastels. It doesn't quite look like how it's going to finish. Trust me, when we get to our multiple layers, you'll really see it. So now, since we're still in our first layer, now we want to put in our first layer of our leaves. And so you're going to use your medium green. So find your medium green pastel. My piece is broken, that's okay. And because leaves of a sunflower have a center vein, and we're going to start along that vein line and make our small strokes heading out to the edge of the leaf. And that'll create for us kind of naturally our sawtooth edge. So starting at what would be the center line, short, small strokes that go out to the edge. Here's another leaf here. Then go in the other direction from the center to the other side. And I had a little bit of a leaf going under here. Same thing for the stems, almost like a dotted line. You're doing what kind of looks like a dotted line. Now, the stems of a sunflower are thick because they have to hold up these big, heavy flowers. So you don't have to worry about having a delicate line. Remember, this is just layer number 1. Now we have not done any color mixing yet, but when it's time where we start to put in our second layers, that's why we need the paper towels to keep our oil pastels clean. Now we're ready to do our first layer of our urn, just our base layer of our urn. So I'm just going to start with my regular red. Now it's actually more of a barn red, but you're going to start with your regular red and then we're going to add layers of color later. Now if you take a look at this urn, it looks like it has stripes going across. That's actually just the turnings that the ceramic artist had when he made that urn out of stoneware. And so we're actually not going to put in these stripes, but it really does help us with this technique of our short, small strokes. So when you go to fill in your urn, you're going to make all of your strokes horizontal, and they're just all going to be parallel to each other. So it would be like this. Just going across these short strokes, like so, all the way across your urn. And you don't have to make them in a row like soldiers, as long as they all are horizontal. They don't have to stack up or line up or look like bricks. But you do want to make sure that it's not colored in like a coloring book with a crayon, that there are short strokes like so. Try not to bend up or down, but keep them going horizontal like this. Now, you see that there's a leaf that drooped over the edge of the urn. So you're going to have to remember and see where your original drawing was to see where the neck of that urn is, and do your marks of red around that. So there's the end of my neck of my urn, and here's where it slopes, and then here's the straight side. Now some paper is showing through, and that's great. That's why the color of your pastel paper actually adds a lot to the final piece. Don't worry about the paper showing through. We're going to be adding more layers of color. So horizontal strokes, finish off at the edge of your urn. Like that. And that's as far as we're going to go today with our first base layer of oil pastel as we work on our pastel sunflowers. But you can see that my hands are rather messy. So I'm going to use a baby wipe to clean up. Now if you have a sink nearby, that's fine, but the baby wipe actually helps with the oil that kind of resides on your hands after manipulating the oil pastel. So I would use a baby wipe first and then go and wash your hands with soap and water. You want to make sure you're clean before you move on. You would hate to get yucky fingers all over your work. You want to try and keep it as neat as possible. So be careful when you handle this. You're going to have to store it in a safe, flat place where nothing will press on top of it until we get to work on it next time in lesson 2 of our pastel sunflowers.